ICQ Podcast episode 323, Radio Communication Museum. Well, hello fellow Amateur radio enthusiasts. Welcome to our 323rd episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by Ben Harrison, Alpha Juliet 6 November Hotel, and of course our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Dan Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is our visit to the National Communication Museum in Derby, UK. Well, as always, it's our listeners that keep this show advert free, and I'd like to thank Ben Harrison, Alpha Juliet 6 November Hotel, who sends on a short message. Says, great show, really enjoyed the first podcast I listened to last week, and say he's now signed up to become a subscription donor. So thank you very much, Ben, for showing the value that you enjoyed in the show, and we really do appreciate you coming on board. And Ben's in California, USA. So as I say, you can show your value for the show and help keep us advert free by doing exactly what Ben has done by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where whatever value you see in what we do, pop it along to us, and it'd be great to help pay our way, and keep the show advert free. Right now, we head across to a news roundtable. We're going to join Martin, Leslie, Edmund, and Dan as they discuss a Centenarian promoting amateur radio to the masses on commercial radio, and extension on the 432 megahertz contact record being achieved. So, as always, guys, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 323 of the ICQ podcast and tonight's news roundtable. A little bit short on bodies, but we will soon keep you entertained. Today, I have Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB. Hi, Leslie.
Good evening, Martin, and it's great to be back here again.
It's great to have you, and you said you behave, so I'm not sure whether I believe you or not, but we'll go for it.
Me, Martin, I always behave-ish.
Yeah, you and Rothwell, if I got the pair of you together, I'd have a nightmare, wouldn't I? But no, in fun. So it's great. We also have Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MMG. Hi, Edmund.
Good evening, Martin. Good evening, everybody.
Hi, Edmund, and good to have you with us today. And you're working from home, I know, so probably nice to get a chat with some people. We also got, ducking the other side of the pond, we have Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Hello there, Martin. You know, that's a big responsibility, saying we're going to keep everybody entertained.
Well, we try, mate. Yeah. I don't think we had any feedback, but Mr. Rothwell convinced me to go on 11 metres the other week for a couple of days. And no, we didn't get any feedback about it. Not that I think it's a bad thing. It's just I just felt a bit not part of it, if you know what I mean. So, but there weren't that many people on, but I just didn't feel part of the community. Not that I was being standoffish or anything, but just didn't. Anyway, we unfortunately don't have Matthew again tonight. Matthew M0NJX is on lockdown in Spain with his children. And Ruth Willett, KM4LAO, unfortunately, we can't raise Ruth, so maybe she's at a lecture or something along those lines. So hopefully we'll have Ruth with us on another occasion. But you have the four of us tonight, and hopefully we'll bring you some good information. We're not going to label too heavily on the COVID virus because I think everybody's doing that. But let's have a look at some positive stories in amateur radio. And the first one is a Centenarian amateur radio on BBC Radio Solent. So BBC Radio Solent in the UK is around the Southampton area, and this gentleman's 100 years old. What do you think, Edmund?
Well, first of all, very happy birthday to Bill Sykes, Golf 2 Hotel Charlie Golf. I can count on one hand the number of G2 plus three-letter call signs that I've worked, and of those, all of them have been passed on from the original holder to their children. So Bill is the original holder of this call sign, and he says in the interview that he became licensed when he was 14, so he got the call sign then in 1936, I guess. Sorry, I've had a long day. My brain's rather melted if the maths are wrong. And he's still going strong now, so this is wonderful. And BBC Radio Solent, unlike many BBC local radio stations in England that only cover one county, Solent covers Dorset, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, so it's a relatively big station. He was on at 8:15 in the morning when you would imagine rush hour, quite a few people would have been listening. And we also know that since the situation with lockdown came about, radio listening overall has increased. So potentially, if you take all of those three things together, this interview could have got a lot of listeners. And you can listen to it online. You need to have an account for BBC Sounds, but assuming you've got one of those, you can listen to it. The whole thing is barely 6 minutes long, and it's not a continuous interview about amateur radio, but amateur radio is one of the first things that Bill mentions, and he carries on mentioning it periodically throughout the 6 minutes. And because the recording online is just of the interview rather than the whole of the programme where there might have been music being played, for example, there aren't rights issues with this recording. So unlike some things which on the BBC Sounds app are only available for 29 days after broadcast or whatever it is, this particular interview will be available for at least a year. So you've got plenty of time to click on it and play it and listen to it. So well worth listening to. Many happy returns, Bill. And it says in the notes that he's active on 80 metres slow scan TV, which is quite a thing. So tune your receivers to 3730 kilohertz and try and decode some images from Bill. Wonderful story, Martin, this, isn't it? Back to you.
Yeah, I quite like it, and I think, for being 100 years old, and I was expecting to see a Morse code, and nothing wrong with Morse code, but I was expecting that at that age he'd be a Morse code operator. But to see slow scan TV, yeah, good on him. But what do you think, Dan?
Well, I would suspect he also does operate Morse code. But my birthday wishes to Bill as well. I got a little bit of a story here on a similar guy here in the U.S. He's not quite as old. He's 96 years old. And I worked him just this last December. And his call sign is W2LID. And he's had that call sign. He's the original holder of that call sign as well. So I joked with him. I said, he's been a lid for 87 years.
Yeah, that's a good call sign to have. But there are some old boys around that are doing very, very well, and hats off to them.
Well, that bodes well for us, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Hopefully, I'll be around in the hundreds and still terrorising the airwaves, and Mr. Rothwell will still be trying to get me into trouble and that sort of thing. So, yeah, good. Yeah. So, it's a brilliant one. Leslie, what's your thoughts on this?
My thoughts, well, first of all, happy birthday, Bill. Really, 100, and still involved in amateur radio, still keeping the mind active. Good on you. About the interview, I think this is really good, It's getting the message out, and good on him. I would sing happy birthday, but my singing ability is 0, I'm afraid. So, happy birthday, Bill, and keep it up, mate. Well done.
Yeah, Bill. And what I will say is, the guys who wished you happy birthday, I'm going to wish you happy birthday from all the rest of the presenters on ICQ podcast, because 100 years and still involved with amateur radio has got to be a great thing. So, happy birthday, Bill. Moving to our next news stories, and I say stories because I'm going to group two together. but we've had a historic transatlantic contact on 432 megahertz. That's across the pond on 432 UHF. Now, I've got
Wow.
to say, it is, Leslie. You go first on this one.
Well, what can I say? I was just reading through this and my jaw just dropped. I mean, I'm used to UHF, short range comms, that type of thing, and, linked to point comms, and not worrying too much about this. And if I really want to go long distance, I tend to use HF. And that sort of just throws my thinking out the window. It really does. What can one say? I'm just looking at the distance on here. Did you catch the distance, Martin?
Well, the second day, because this was done on the 7th of April, but then they increased the distance on the 11th of April to 4,370 kilometres, which has got to be over 3,000 miles, I'd suggest.
Wow, yeah, just what can one say? It's just absolutely mind blowing. Like I said, it turns up my normal working, my normal thinking about how radios should be used and what they should be used for. It just turns it totally on its head.
Well, I think that's one of the beauties of our hobby is that, there's the theory. There's the theory, and the theory says UHF should be line of sight, and it doesn't go very far. And then things come along, propagation changes, new modes like FT8 come along, and without FT8, I'm sure this wouldn't have happened. But yeah, it's there. It's out there. What do you think, Dan?
Well, we all know FT8 isn't really ham radio. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Cat amongst the pigeons or what?
I noticed everybody went silent there. No, this is great. This is great, but you know what I'm waiting for? I don't know if you guys have ever heard about this, but the ARRL has an award that they're going to give out for the first Earth to Mars contact. So that's what I'm waiting for, and chances are it's going to be on FT8 or something like it, probably.
I would have thought so. Isn't this the award that Hiram Percy Maxim set up many years ago as a cup and all sorts of things waiting at the ARRL head office?
Percy didn't set this up himself, but it's called the Elser Mathers Cup.
Right. All right. I got that one wrong.
I think I've heard of this before, but I just can't remember the details.
Yeah. There's an article in it in the 1969 QST magazine.
Well, you're dead right. I think that something like FT8 is certainly going to play a part, or something like it will play a part in the communications from Mars, because, some of Joe Taylor's software was the first time that people worked Earth, Moon, Earth without running 3 sheds and 2 garages worth of power at the moon. So, yeah, it's coming. It's coming. I'm sure of it. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
Well, congratulations to the parties involved, first of all. And speaking as somebody who has yet to have his first FT8 contact on any band, I'm quite glad that FT8 was used here, because unless you're going to get into the realms of suggested false decodes, the contact is there, complete with accurate signal reports on screen for all to see, so there can't be any dispute, really, over whether the QSO actually happened. Marine tropospheric ducts can be virtually lossless, and they're almost like waveguides over the water, so if you can get a signal into one of those, then all bets are off. Pretty much anything is possible. And of course, at 432 megahertz, for a given antenna size, you can get a lot more gain and a lot more ERP going into that duct. So, for example, at one end of this contact, all they were using was an 18-element Yagi. Well, I've got an 18-element Yagi for Group A UHF television sitting on my roof, and it's a tiny little thing, or it looks tiny when viewed from the ground, so it's not even as if they were using bayed and stacked Yagis about 6 or 8 or a dozen antennas all connected together. This was relatively low tech and only 100 watts going into it, so no huge linear amplifiers or anything like that. So very many congratulations, and I'm sure this is a record that can be broken, because if somebody with a massive antenna system at either end of the path did manage to get themselves into a marine tropospheric duct, then, as I said, all bets are off as far as I'm concerned. And one final thing, I don't know if this is true, but I did read somewhere that around about the same time this contact was happening, a lot of dust and sand from the Sahara was being blown out over towards the Atlantic Ocean, and there was a hypothesis that this could have absorbed moisture in the atmosphere, thereby turning it super refractive. Don't know if that is true or have any bearing if it is true, but maybe that's another tool that DXers could have at their disposal. Sand.
Yeah, let's build a big fan down in the Sahara Desert and blow this way.
Well, it's interesting hypothesis, though, right? I mean, you could whether people can sort of predict those things happening, and then the guys on 432 could all gear up to do something if that happened.
Yeah, it certainly is. So the second, the longer one of the two, which they did 4,370 kilometres, was between St John's in Newfoundland to Frankfurt in Germany. So that's a fair old trek, as you say, and great news. It's a real positive for amateur radio that we're still finding these things that are new and exciting as we come along.
Martin, I think that was the equivalent distance. I don't think anybody actually made a QSO between Newfoundland and Frankfurt, did they?
I thought it was. Was it? Did I get that wrong?
I think in the article it says that, to put it into context, that's an equivalent distance.
All right, mate. Sorry, I got that wrong.
But don't take my word for that. Double check.
Thinking about it, if you think about it, it's an equivalent distance. It's still phenomenal. So good news.
It is, bearing in mind that my best DX on 77's SSB was the West Sussex coast to the North Kent coast, so about 50 miles, if that.
Yeah, well, I did many moons ago Ditchling Beacon, which is just north of Brighton, to Amersham, the repeater at Amersham on FM on 1 watt. So I was quite pleased with that one. But that's line of sight.
If it involves FM and repeaters, it's not real radio.
But it's real radio from Ditchling Beacon right across out to Amersham. I mean, that's miles. That's got to be 70 odd miles plus. But hey hum, for 1 watt, I was quite pleased with it. But it is line of sight. Let's face it, I was up on one of the high points on the South Downs.
I speak in jest, of course, and I was referencing Dan's comment about FT8.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a real radio operator because I don't do Morse.
Martin, I did go to the article, Martin, and it is quite correct. What it says is, to put the distance into context, 4,370 is the same as St John's, Newfoundland to Frankfurt in Germany. So yeah, they're using a comparison.
Yeah, I picked that up wrong as I was scamming through while we were talking. Okay, next news story, which is kind of almost identical. On 2 meters, a transatlantic record was extended to 4,760 kilometers. So, once again, an FTA.
Double well.
Double well. Edmund, what do you think about the 2 meter one?
Oh, the 2 meter band, love it. Well, again, congratulations to those involved. And again, I would imagine it was a marine duct rather than a combination of tropospheric ducting and sporadic E, because it's the wrong time of the year for that anyway, I guess. So, yes, less loss over the path, but not so much gain on the antenna. So it's that's one heck of an achievement as well, and something that I personally could only dream of, Martin.
I think we can all only dream of it, mate. We could all only dream of it. Dan, you any thoughts on this one?
Well, again, congratulations to these guys, and yeah, it'd be nice to know a little bit more about what actually happened. But I guess if they keep doing it, they'll figure it out.
Yeah. And it's nice today. I'm feeling quite nice today because these are all nice, warm achievements that we're actually doing in amateur radio rather than gloom and doom. So it's all good ones. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Well, like I said earlier, I said double well there. I'm going to start getting fined if I use that word too much. The distance on this is absolutely phenomenal. And like they're saying, what they're doing is they're decreasing the amount of engineering that's being used. There's less metalwork up in the air and more to do with the software that is being used. It's just a change, and it's improving the communication systems to do greater distances, and I think it's a really good achievement. And where is this going to lead next? You tell me. I've got no idea. What can it do next?
I think it'll be Mars, Earth, mate. Somebody's going to get that certificate.
Get the cup.
Yeah, get the cup, and there's prize money as well, isn't there, Dan?
I don't think so. I think all you get is the cup.
All right, I thought there was money involved as well, but yeah, fine. I mean, the cup. Let's face it, the cup you can show for years after you spent the money anyway. And I'm sure that anybody that actually does it will be able to dine out on that one for a long time.
Yeah.
Moving on to our next news story. Tweet with Morse code. Now, Dan, you're our resident Morse code expert. Raspberry Pis and tweeting and that sort of thing. What do you think?
Actually, this is a pretty cool article. It's a real unique use of a Raspberry Pi, and I like it. We're doing a lot. Our club, in our club, there's a lot of guys doing a lot of interesting things with Raspberry Pis, and it's almost like a perfect ham radio computer, in a way. The guys are doing packet stuff and networking stuff, and just all kinds of interesting things you can do with the Raspberry Pi.
And they're cheap enough to, once they're set up and working, you can just leave them and they work very well. I mean, I've got a DMR hotspot based on a Raspberry Pi, and that's been up and that just works. And every now and again I think, I better check it and make sure it's on. And of course it's still on and it's still working and it does what it says on the tin. So, but the Raspberry Pi magazine's a great magazine. They often have articles on amateur radio, which are well worth a look every now and again. Leslie, have you come across Raspberry Pis in the magazine yet?
Well, we had a guy at my local club, the Silverthorne Radio Club, and he was very, very much into Raspberry Pi. And he gave a talk upon what they could be used for, and I was fascinated by this, and all sorts of little projects he was working on. I must admit, I've not gone into it myself, but just one of those things. The next project I've got, I'm going to get a Raspberry Pi and we're going to play with it. It's on my list to do, definitely. Tweeting, well, I must admit, if you could see my face, my eyes, as soon as somebody mentioned tweeting, my eyes just rolled back. I'm not a fan of that mode of communication. What can one say? But hey, everyone to their own. But good luck to him. This is all good stuff. And it's what amateur radio is all about. Lots of little projects. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, it certainly is. And Raspberry Pis, I think they're around about UK price. You could probably pick one up for around about £50 with the power supply for it.
They're not expensive at all.
They're not expensive. A screen keyboard and an SD card, and away you go. I've got 2 or 3 of them kicking around, and they work very, very well. Usually, I set them up as an appliance, like the one that's my DMR hotspot, and they just work. And I forget about them until one day I'm sitting here thinking, I wonder what that's up to, and I just log in, and of course it's still working. So, great devices. Now, Edmund, I know you're not a computer person, and Raspberry Pi probably sounds quite interesting to you, but you can't have cream with this one.
I confess that I've never owned one and I've never used one, so there's nothing sensible I can really say about this, Martin. Sorry.
No. I guessed, because I know you're not into computers, but they're just a little credit card size computer, quite cheap, in price, just a single circuit board. Very useful for all sorts of things. But there you go. Maybe I'll show you one next time you're up here.
As you've mentioned Morse, though, can I go briefly off topic and mention
I don't see why.
Thank you. And mention that Matt, Mike Zero Papa Tango Oscar, is currently doing a superb series of videos on YouTube called Lockdown Morse. And it does what it says on the tin. There are about 5 lessons on there so far. So if you go into YouTube and search for Lockdown Morse and you can study that, then you can brush up or learn CW from scratch. And I've been faffing about and putting it off and making excuses and starting and stopping for a long time. I've decided that 2020, especially everything that's going on at the moment, is the year that I'm actually going to properly sit down and do it. Because apart from anything else, I want a CW contact on 6 meters when the sporadic E season arrives. So Lockdown Morse on YouTube, highly, highly recommended. And if you're listening to this, Matt, thank you for all the time and trouble that you put into producing these videos, and all power to your elbow, sir.
Yeah, and before Dan says it, Dan always says, get on the air.
That's right.
Yes, get on the air, Dan, isn't it? Yeah.
Soon as
Switch
soon
it
as
on.
soon as you get there, Edmund, let me know. We'll set up a schedule and try to work on 20 meters or something.
Nah, 432 megahertz across the Atlantic.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but 20 meters sounds like a better bet.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, I looked at it, and before Dan bends my ear, I'm actually designated as a key worker at the moment, so I'm still going to work, and I'm actually busier. We've got hardly anybody travelling at the moment, but I'm actually busier because lots of maintenance is happening. So I'm dealing with maintenance people turning up they're doing all the getting ahead of themselves on maintenance. So, yeah, you think you have a quiet morning and three maintenance teams turn up and say, "Oh, we're just fitting you in while we're in the area." So
I'm not going to turn up, Martin.
no. You're a different zone to me, aren't you? But yeah, I'm down on southern, you're East Anglia. But yeah, all right. So all being that's good. Look, next news story: amateur radio on BBC Three Counties radio. So lots of BBC and lots of amateur radio stuff getting on national radio. And our general manager of the RSGB, Steve Thomas, M0CIB, and Paul Devlin, G1SMP, of the NHS, were interviewed by Three Counties Radio. That's got to be a great one, and it follows into the next news story, but I think it's a great one. Leslie, go first on this one.
Okay, Martin. Yeah, I've never actually met Steve Thomas, M1ACB. Well, I will have to one day and just to sort of say hello to him. But this is about getting amateur radio out there, getting the message across what this great hobby is about. So well done, Steve, and well done, Paul. Getting the message. That's the thing. And I've seen so many places where they have a radio and somebody's working away at the radio. It's about turning around, speaking to people, show them what we do, getting them involved, show them what the hobby's about. And good luck to both of them, because I think this is really good.
Yeah, well, as I say, I think they've done a great job, and you must meet Steve. He's a real nice guy. In fact, he's always a pleasure when we meet him at rallies and various places. And yeah, you should come along, Leslie. You should come along and say hi to Steve. So, Edmund, what do you think about the promotion the RSGB is doing on local radio?
Well, they chose a good station to be on because, having previously said that Solent is one of the biggest stations in England, BBC Three Counties Radio is probably the biggest, because that covers, well, as it says in the title, 3 counties: Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire and Buckinghamshire. And of course the RSGB is currently headquartered in Bedfordshire. So this one is a bit different if you want to listen to it. It's not just the interview, it's the whole program comes up. So that is time limited. It won't be available for over a year. It's only available for, I think, 30 days from the date of broadcast. So by the time the podcast is released, you'll have probably about 3 weeks if you want to listen to the interview. And again, you probably will need to have an account with BBC Sounds and log in to be able to hear it. As for the interview itself, it was dedicated entirely to amateur radio, unlike the one on Radio Solent, where there was discussion of other things as well. And Steve Thomas and the other gentleman from GB1 NHS, I thought did a very good job of explaining amateur radio, what it is, what it can do to the public. So it's very much worth a listen if you get an opportunity. The interview itself isn't hugely long, so yeah, I recommend making time to have a listen. And it's nice to hear so many NHS stations on the air. GB1 NHS is the main one, but if you go on to qrz.com, then pretty much every available GB prefix with NHS after it is taken and is on the air. And if you look on one of the clusters like dxheat.com, for example, you'll see that most of those stations have been making quite a lot of QSOs already in April, so they're obviously very much in demand. Martin, back to you.
Yeah, certainly are. And one thing I will say is that the RSGB have been very active recently, quite rightly so. And they've been probably more visual, because I know a lot goes on in the RSGB that we don't always see, but they do look after us. And as I say, this is interesting. But Dan, okay, it doesn't affect your side of the pond, but are the ARRL doing a similar thing where they're promoting the hobby in this troubled time?
Well, that's a good question. And unfortunately, the problem is that we still don't really have a CEO for the ARRL. I mean, we have the temporary guy, but we need to get our permanent CEO in place, and then maybe get him on some shows. We don't have anything like the BBC here, so I'm thinking maybe I can get him on Fox News.
Yeah, isn't that where your president deals with Fox News?
That was the joke I was trying to make.
I was misbehaving as well.
You cut that out if you like.
That's a second cat amongst the pigeons.
Yeah, no problems. But no, it's interesting, and
no, yeah, because I listened to this interview a couple of days ago actually, and very well spoken, and made a real nice interview. So yeah, I think things like that over here are going to be put on hold till we get our next CEO in place. But yeah, it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, well, it's a shame you haven't got your CEO in place, and we won't dwell on poor Mr. Mickle's demise, but it's a shame you haven't, because now would be a good time to have a leader in the chair, I would suggest, going forward. So, yeah. Well, kind of our next news story, and I'm sorry, Dan, it's once again UK, and you mentioned our NHS earlier when we were chatting, which is our National Health Service. The RSGB launches Go to See, which is Get on the Air to Care. And it's an initiative that they're putting together, and Steve Thomas has once again been involved in promoting this. Heather, the marketing lady from the RSGB, is also, Heather Parsons is also promoting this. So a lot going on. I think, now's a good time to show that we really do care for the NHS, because they're doing a great job. Go on, Edmund, you go first on this one.
Well, it's a nice initiative to see, and as radio amateurs, I suppose we are uniquely placed that we can do our hobby at home. We don't have to travel to venues to meet other people if we were, as we would if we were playing golf, for example, or something like that. And certainly locally, there has been an awful lot of increase in activity in these parts in West Sussex on the 4 metre band. At the last count, there were 37 stations either equipped or active on the band. So everybody's checking up on everybody else, and people who need assistance in particular have been invited to call in. So I think this is being put into practice anyway, but the fact we've got the Get on the Air to Care hashtag for social media purposes is good as well. And there's also, I believe we can optionally put /NHS after our call signs, can't we? Not that I've done that yet or heard anybody doing it, and I think that's at all license levels as well. So, yeah, this is good news, Martin. Back to you.
Yeah, I think so. I think so because it keeps people aware. And I think we are very lucky in our hobby because our hobby is a very sociable hobby. And we do communicate with each other. And yes, there's far more radio traffic on at the moment that certainly makes it phenomenal. Dan, I know you don't have the NHS your side of the pond, and you were talking to us about it earlier, but what do you think of this initiative?
Well, what I like about it is it really gives a sense of community. I mean, it seems like you guys over there have a real sense of community that we often lack here. Everything here is a little bit more divided. We have states vying with other states for medical equipment and all kinds of stuff like that. And just doesn't sound like it's that over there, and that was a good thing.
Yeah, well, I suppose in fairness, and the Brits are going to all want to string me up after saying this, but the UK is probably as big as some of your states, or not much bigger than some of your states. So your country is so massive that you're so spread out, you probably don't have the same sense of community that a smaller country would have.
Yeah, that might be true. That might be the situation.
Well, anyway, as I say, that's where I think it might be. Leslie, final words on this one. Go for it.
Well, what can I say? As everyone's sort of aware, things are a bit rough at the moment, and this is really about showing our appreciation to what the NHS is doing. And you've probably seen the scenes on the news with people clapping outside the street. We've got WhatsApp groups making sure that everyone's okay in the street. And and on this side of things, with the radio amateurs showing their support to the NHS, what can I say? It's absolutely fabulous, and this is what we should be doing. I've just lost for words on this because it's all of it at the moment. So you understand, Martin?
I certainly do, and at the moment I'm contracting to the railway, and they've based me at the moment at a station in the wilds of nowhere. And in fairness, I've almost become a local, and it is really nice because the locals, when they're out walking their dogs, they come by the station and make sure I'm all right. And I can't. I live in South London, where it's a very very isolated community in some ways, and to be working in a community which is very rural and everybody cares about each other, and they social distance, but they come by and they care. And I think one of the things I've noticed, not just in our hobby, but right across the board, is people are caring at the moment. And let's hope the caring stays a bit more when we sort ourselves out. But it is a different time, and yeah, that's all I can say really without getting too emotional. Right, well, that concludes the news stories. Let's find out what the boys have been up to since the last time I spoke to you. So go on, Leslie, what have you been playing with?
Well, totally different theme on this, Martin. You know we're key workers. We both work on the railways, so I got what's the word, isolated for 2 weeks. Through a different reason. I didn't have anything. I was perfectly fine, but I was told to go home for 2 weeks, which I did. And I've been digging out, you know, when you've got all this radio stuff and you haven't got a clue what you got and whether it's working or not. Well, I've been rummaging and finding stuff I didn't have a clue. And, you know, oh, no, that doesn't work. Oh, get rid of that. Oh, yeah, let's repair that. And so that's what I've been doing, Martin. And I haven't got a big workshop here. It's just a sort of tiny thing. People would laugh at it. But some of the sort of bits and pieces sort of out on the bench, and occasionally I've had to clear. But that's what I've been doing, Martin. Just rummaging, going through all my kit, making sure it's working. Some of the stuff I've never found before. What else can I say?
Yeah, it sounds like fun, mate. It sounds like fun, and probably very similar to me, but we'll come on to that later. Dan, what have you been up to radio-wise since the last time?
Well, so last Saturday was the Michigan QSO party. So I operated the Michigan QSO party, and that was a lot of fun. It's a 12-hour contest, so it's not really long. I only ended up working, well, maybe 5 or 6 hours of it. I'd have to check the log, but found out a bunch of things. One of them was I'm not really my station is really not a contest station. Sometimes folks really couldn't hear me too well, so I'd need a better antenna or an amplifier, which I probably won't get. But another kind of funny thing, you know, as we talk, I'm mostly a CW operator. Well, you know, in a QSO party, you want to make as many contacts as possible. So I actually got up on phone, and I don't have a desk mic for my new radio, the Flex 6400. So I was holding the mic, calling CQ, and then every time somebody called me back, I'd have to set down the mic, get my hands on the keyboard, type in their call sign, pick up the mic, and then give the exchange. Well, that's not optimal. Let's put it that way. So that, you know, now if I'm gonna do this anymore, I have to try and find a desk mic for doing a little contesting. So I guess the whole point of this is, even if you're not a contester, you should probably try a contest every now and then, because you find out a lot about your station. And those are two of the lessons I learned this Saturday.
And you also learned the lesson of you're going to buy yourself a nice shiny new toy.
Don't go on eBay.
Yeah.
Oh dear, I shouldn't, Dan. That's naughty. But a desk mic can be very, very useful. So yeah,
Or maybe a headset with a boom mic or something.
Yeah, I talked to the Cambridge Cam Hams guys, and they do a lot of operating and all bits and pieces, and they reckon that some of the best headsets are the ones that the gamers use. And, because they're playing games and they got the headsets on all the time, they're the more comfortable ones. So I'm not recommending any one against any other, but there might be a market you look for rather than amateur radio, because they might be more comfortable, Dan.
Yeah, that's an idea.
Yeah, just a thought. Right, Edmund, what have you been up to since the last time we chatted?
Well, I've been hanging out on HF, and 40 metres is my natural habitat, but I've even been being adventurous and making contacts on 20 metres. Shock horror. What's happening to me? I'm using the club call sign Golf X-Ray 3 Whiskey Mike Uniform, which is the club call for Amberley Museum, which is currently closed. And even though Ofcom very kindly relaxed the rules about special event stations needing to be visitable by members of the public, that doesn't help in the case of Amberley, because the museum is closed to both visitors and volunteers, so we can't get inside to operate Golf Bravo 2 Charlie Papa Mike. So I've been using that call sign, had some interesting contacts, quite a few special event stations from Finland on 20 metres, OH2 stay home, OH4 stay home, things like that. So that was nice to get them in the log. On 40 metres, there's normally quite a few Italian stations, but there's been a lot of Spanish on as well, which is good in one way because I speak the language. But the drawback with that is that there is this award or diploma going on at the moment called Yo me quedo en casa, which roughly translates as I'm staying at home. And I get the impression that most Spanish stations you will hear, certainly on 40 metres, are primarily interested in working each other for this award rather than talking to stations outside of Spain. So haven't got that many in the logbook, but all told, I've done about 80 QSOs in the space of a month, which is a lot by my standards because I'm a bit of a rag chewer. And my best DX is Lebanon on 15 metres, and that is DX by my standards. I've heard signs of sporadic E on 10 metres, but haven't worked anybody on that band yet. So certainly a good time to be on the air. Propagation on 40 metres has been a bit strange the last week or so. I've often spent 10 minutes calling CQ without any replies, and then an existing QSO will fade in nicely on the frequency underneath me. So propagation has perhaps been a bit unusual. And there are different kinds of special event stations out there, because although the ones that you might expect to work have been cancelled, so for example, International Marconi Day has been pulled on the weekend this podcast is released. Mills on the Air on the third weekend in May has been cancelled. Museums on the Air the third and the fourth weekends in June has been pulled as well. But they have said for that one, incidentally, that you can go on from home using your own call sign in support of your museum. So GX3WMU will be on the air for all 4 days in June in support of Amberley Museum. So we've lost a lot of call signs that we might normally expect to hear, for example, the windmills and Marconi Day stations, as I said. But because of this relaxation in the station needing to be visitable rule by Ofcom, there are quite a few call signs that are coming up that have never been heard before. So people are taking out special event station call signs in support of the NHS. There are a few stay-at-home special event stations coming up. And if you want to keep track of them, on Facebook there are 2 groups, both of which are administered by Mark, G1PIE. One of them is dedicated to special event stations in the UK, and the other one is for overseas stations. And I'm just looking up to see what the exact title is. The overseas one is Worldwide Special Event Stations. The UK only one is RSGB Special Event Stations, all words to that effect. If you put them into Facebook, you'll find them. So if that's your thing, it's well worth keeping an eye on those groups. So that's it, Martin. HF and more HF. No 2 metres at all.
Okay, Edmund, well, that sounds good. You've been busy, boy. Right, what have I been up to? Well, we bought some antennas at the National Hamfest, Edmund, didn't we? And I managed to get around to putting my 4-metre antenna up.
4 metres.
Yeah, 4 metres. Now, this is not an advert for them, but it worked absolutely straight out of the box. It was a CCOM 4-metre dipole. Okay, very nicely made. I bought it at the National Hamfest. I put it on a pole on Saturday, and the guy said, adjust the length for this particular frequency, adjust it for that. I adjusted it up, put it on the pole, 1-to-1, bang, straight across the whole band. So I was very impressed. Best contact at the moment is about 30 kilometres, but that person was sounding as strong as if they were next door to me. So I'm expecting some good things from that one. And I actually put my 4-metre rig in the shack, 4 metres FM in the shack. So I'm 4 metres from home, as well as if I'm down your way, Edmund, I might also have 4 metres in the car. Also, I've been playing with my Arduinos, Just fiddling around with Arduinos on some Arduino projects, so there might be more from that later. Some quite interesting bits and pieces. Like Leslie, I've ordered some parts to repair some of the projects that I've been threatening to do for absolutely ages, so I'm actually getting the parts in to do those projects now. I've been on various nets, including the South London 4-metre net on a Thursday night, Sutton Cheam net, plus umpteen other nets as I come across them. I just call in and join in, and I've also joined in on the Michigan net a couple of times, the DMR net, so I've been active on DMR as well. And I've also had chats with the guys in Cyprus, so a lot going on the radio. Probably more active on the radio at the moment than I have been for a long time. I don't know if I mentioned last time, and if I did, I apologise, but a gentleman dropped an FT450D round to me to see if it was working. It was an M3, and he said, I'm not sure if it's working properly, can you check it for me? And I worked at a special event station in Bulgaria on 20 metres for a 5 and 9. So I said to him, it's definitely working, because I hadn't set it up, hadn't done any modifications of setting up the audio or anything like that, just straight out of the box, and it worked. And Leslie, you're dead right. You come across things you didn't think you had or you forgot you had. I come across a Yaesu FT290 Mark 1. It was put in a box because it wasn't very well, and I was going to fix it, and I forgot I had it. So I might actually fix that as well yet. So, like you guys, a lot going on. So, but that's the interesting part about our hobby. Great fun, and we enjoy ourselves. So that's great news. Right, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB.
Thank you, Martin. It's been a blast. Enjoy it as always. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great fun, as I say, I enjoy as well. I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MMG.
Thanks for having me on, Martin.
No problems, Edmund, and we'll catch up with you soon. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, for joining us from the other side of the pond.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and I'll try and catch up with you on the Michigan State Net next time. I'll let you know when I'm on, and we'll catch up as well. So that's a great one. Shame that Matthew, as I say, is on lockdown in Spain, and Ruth is, let's say, AWOL. No, I'm not sure where Ruth is. She's probably at college doing something. So, in fairness, she did say she wouldn't make them all. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you, and say 73s, and we'll do it again soon.
Cheerio.
All right, 7-3, guys.
7-3.
Yeah, 73s, and we'll catch on with the rest of the podcast.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at a news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. Got an email here from listener Nicholas KG9 Echo, and he's asked us to let everybody know about a piece of software he's been working on. It's called CW Morse Code, and it's a horizontal leveler and ambience paddle practice oscillator app for Android. So we'd like to point you obviously in that direction to check it out. We'll put a link on ICQpodcast.com for you to check out, as I say, what Nicholas is doing, and maybe it might be some interest to have a play with during these times of lockdown and, as I say, limited being able to get out and about. Now, talking obviously about the lockdown, we've got fantastic news. Our friends at Essex Hams have been working away on a completely free online training course for the UK Amateur Ham Radio Foundation course. They've had a record-breaking 260 people enrolled on the course that started earlier on this month, with a further 164 waiting to start the next course. So fantastic achievement there by the Essex Hams to get so many people signed up, as I say, for the UK Amateur Radio Foundation exam course that they're working on at the moment. So hopefully, guys, you'll get those guys fully licensed and on the air, and it'd be wonderful to have such a wonderful increasement in numbers in the Essex Hams areas. Now, some good news that amateurs in Japan are expected to gain access to 160 and 80 meter bands, taking effect from around about now. So good news, they're going to get that opportunity there. It will also include some activity of FT8 on 80 meters and Whisper at 160 meters as well. So lots of information about the access to the bands that they've got. We'll publish this on ICQpodcast.com, so you can check it out of what they're being allowed to operate on in Japan. And so if you're visiting, some more access for us to use as amateurs in Japan, say going forward. Now we head over to our features episode, and it's a feature on the Radio Communications Museum in Derby, UK. It's the first part, which we're concluding show here, is really about the foundation of the museum, and I say discussion with Steve Hazeldine, Golf 8 Echo Delta Mike, in relation to his passion and background and hobby. The interview then goes on to YouTube, where it's a lot more visual about a lot of what's in the collection, the museum, etc. So do check out our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/ICQ podcast, where you'll be able to see, the full video there that we recorded last year. So I hope you enjoy this episode's feature.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well guys, this is going to be a really interesting interview. I am dead sure. I've spent the morning with Steve, and hopefully he's going to give me as good a chat as he did earlier. I'm with Steve at the Radio Communications Museum of Great Britain up here in Derby. It's a new museum that will be opening shortly to the public and radio groups. The call sign, you've also got a GB2 RCM special event call sign, Steve, but tell us your own call sign and then a bit about how you got to come up with this idea.
Right, well, my call sign is GHEBM, Echo Bravo Mike, England's best modulation.
Yeah.
But I've had that call for nearly 50 years now, so quite a long time. Started as a youngster, interested at school, and then really have been active ever since. And probably about 10-15 years ago, I was looking with a friend at rebuilding some an old radio, and I went to buy a sample of this radio. It was a radio I'd had as a young lad, and when I got to the amateur's house that I was buying this old military radio from, it was quite surprising, because he had a row of Eddystone radios. Now, Eddystone isn't a name we kind of hear about much now, but back in the 1960s, they were absolutely the bees and E's. And as a schoolboy, I could never afford anything approaching that. And when I saw these really good radios at this guy's house, I suddenly realised that I could now afford to buy them. So that really made me go back home. I should say, the guy didn't want to sell those radios. He sold me the old Army radio. But anyway, then I started looking in the magazines for some Eddystone radios. And I eventually found the one I was looking for and did the deal. And that was the start. And by the start, I mean, I now have over 200 different models of Eddystone radio. But the collection then started to grow, and now we have over 2,000 radios in the collection.
Well, I know what you mean about Eddystone radios. I owned one for a while, and then I moved it on because I wasn't using it, and I felt it was wrong of me not to let somebody else have the enjoyment I was having from the particular one I had. British made, they were engineered beautifully. When you rolled the tuning dial, it was weighted and it moved. It just oozed quality, don't they?
Well, in many respects, it was the mechanical side that really outstripped the electronics, and in many respects, the radio performance was not as good as some of the competitors, and quite often on ships, it was the second receiver, and there was another receiver which would be classified as the primary receiver. But the mechanical construction was superb, and that's been a real bonus because that's given a very long life to these radios, and it means you can restore them very effectively and bring them back to as good as they were when they were new.
Yeah, they for certainly are. Now, 2,000 radios. Are you planning to get any more? I mean, we've got a massive selection behind us. Very, very impressive. I assume it's an ongoing love.
Yes, I mean, we're now being a little bit more kind of specific on the radios we're looking for. We are really trying to focus on English manufactured radios. That's the kind of the primary. But really any radio that's been used within the UK. This has really meant that, I suppose, initially I was looking at what I'd call commercial radios, not amateur radios. So this meant the military and also government use was typical. And of course, the government will primarily source in the UK, but often will source from overseas. And that really meant that the collection as not just a British collection.
Yeah. Well, as I say, you've kind of split the grouping a little bit into amateur radio stuff, and most of what we can see behind us is amateur radio. As you said, you've got commercial, you've got some military gear, but you've got some really, really interesting models in amongst those. And, I think the guys and I have wandered around with you this morning, and we've literally had our mind blown away on this.
Yes, it's interesting. We've within the collection, we've got some radios that are unique. So, for example, in the amateur radio market, we've got the KW2000D, the Delta model, of which only 2 were ever made. One is at Bletchley Park, and I'm pleased to say we now have one in our collection, but we had to go all the way to Australia to get that one, so they really are rare. And some of the other radios, the actual radio model isn't necessarily rare, but the way that particular radio was used, it makes it unique. So we've got a number of military radios that we use in some quite exciting environments.
Yeah, you certainly have. But you started off, and it's nice, you run a communications company, and this is kind of your hobby part of that now. And you were telling me about, you started off by having a tower on a piece of land earlier on, and you've got repeaters up there and all that sort of thing, haven't you?
Yes, that was really a business by accident, you could say, in that it was a site that the local amateur radio club used for VHF National Field Day and events like that. And another amateur and myself thought it would be really good to have some form of permanent structure on top of this hill for amateur radio purposes. But it was just at the start of the cellular phone expansion, and we were able to in fact put up a mast that was used for cellular, and that mast now has been up nearly 40 years, and we've really been able to not only use it for commercial purposes but for amateur purposes, and we've just gone live with the 5 gigahertz beacon, So look for GB3RCM, and that's up on 5 gigs.
So that's phenomenal what you've been doing, and it's very interesting. I mean, you told me the story of earlier on that you've been in amateur radio 50 plus years. You told me that you learnt most of your amateur radio information from books purely because it was 2 bus rides away as a youngster to get to the local club, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, I started getting interested in amateur radio when I was probably 11 or 12, and the local radio club, I lived in Nottingham at the time, and I was in the southern part of the city, and the amateur radio club was in the northern part, and it really meant that it would require 2 journeys, 2 bus journeys each way, and so I decided really not to go there. And most of my learning experience was actually listening to people on 80 metres, and there was a particular net that used to be on every night, and I learnt so much because they would talk about what they'd done during the day, building antennas and testing things, and every day I got practical education, really, and so I was lucky with that, plus reading the books. I got my RAE, as it was then.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that's kind of missing a little bit in this hobby today is there's not, people don't tend to do their apprenticeship as shortwave listeners. They don't tend to listen to the radio. They go get their license, which is a different way of getting it. But in the earlier days, going back a few years, you did predominantly do a lot more on shortwave listening, didn't you?
Oh yes, I mean, I would say that every night I spent several hours, probably when I was supposed to be doing my homework, but I had the radio on in front of me, and I will be tuning around not just the amateur bands but the shortwave bands in general, and that certainly was a kind of a key interest for me. Whereas now, most children are more IT based, and so it's computer related things, and as I mentioned earlier, we do run code clubs here at the museum, and we're finding that some of the children who come to the code club, they then choose to do our electronics course, then they join our technology club, and as part of the technology club they can take their foundation license, and we've got a group going through at the moment. In fact, only this weekend a group of them, they sat their practical exam, and I'm pleased to say they all came through with flying colours, which is excellent.
That is excellent news. And the thing is that amateur radio is now not the mainstream hobby it was, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But when the youngsters realise that a lot of the computer things and the things they're doing, and they start to realise that Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and mobile phones are radios, then it's aiming them in the right direction, and they often want some form of communications to link the device together. So I think amateur radio is a good thing. We might not get all of them into the hobby, but what you're doing of having code clubs and electronics and amateur radio certainly gives a youngster quite a good grounding, I would suggest.
Yes, I mean, we actually hold part of the code club in this room. So while they're programming their computers, they're surrounded by radio equipment, and it's inevitable people say, well, what does that do and how does it work? And so to be able to switch it on and explain that is brilliant, really, because they are completely unaware of amateur radio as a hobby, and to be honest, they really don't think of radio as a technology, because broadcast radio they hardly ever listen to, because they stream everything over the internet these days. And it is interesting that because we've got a mobile phone section of the museum, the children engage with that first. and they don't realise that a mobile phone is a radio receiver and transmitter. It's just that they haven't thought about it. So it's obvious once you tell them. But equally, the same with, as you mentioned, Bluetooth and just general Wi-Fi. I mean, it says it in the name, but Wi-Fi is still just something you do on a computer or on a mobile phone.
Yeah. It's kind of one of these things where it's a black box. Something happens, and it really is for a lot of people. Well, it's magic, but as you do your amateur radio course, you learn more about the hobby, and you get a greater insight. So I think what you're doing is absolutely great there.
Well, I must admit I'm getting a great buzz out of it. The children really are enjoying it. I mean, they don't have to come to these clubs. This is in their free time, and really the biggest problem is at the end of the session, you kind of getting them to go home. That's fantastic. And what it does show, though, that if you open children's eyes to science and technology, they are keen to learn. And we've got this huge shortage in the UK at the moment of engineers, and I'm sure that part of that is children just have not been given the opportunity to understand what's out there. And I hope that we can do our bit. But it's only part of what the museum does. Education is a very important part, but we're also working with people at the absolute opposite end of the age spectrum as well.
Well, that's good. That's certainly good, because everybody needs something to keep their brain active. And as you say, with youngsters, it's once you show them something, they will soak it up. And I think I've come on this conclusion many times, is I think the reason today sometimes our hobby's a bit excluded is purely because if you're a group of people in a room and you and I have got handy talkies on our belt and we pull them out, most of the people in the room won't understand what we're doing. So you'll get some bright spark who is unaware or ignorant of what we're doing but doesn't want to look a fool, that will take the mickey out of us, will harangue us because he or she doesn't understand. And the rest of the sheep will follow. Yeah? But I find when you ever show somebody a piece of technology and you explain what it does, they're actually very, very interested. So I think what you're doing is good.
Well, yes, I think what is interesting is youngsters, their brains are like sponges, and you only have to show them something once and they get it. And once they get it, they're suddenly very, very keen. And they've just not been exposed to radio before, and so we're giving them that opportunity. But with the older people who come to the museum, either as volunteers or just as visitors, then there is an opportunity to get them to be aware that amateur radio exists and just how they can become part of it.
Which is very, very good. Now, you mentioned to me, we will at some point in time wander off into your workshop, where I will promise not to dribble on the floor again. You did say to me that you came across a problem purely after you started setting up the museum, where some of the radios have EEPROMs in them, and they are something you told me that I didn't know about is EEPROMs only hold their charge for a certain amount of time, and then they literally almost start bit flipping and wiping themselves clean. So you've been doing some work there, haven't you?
Yes, well, quite a lot of the what I call professional radios, so these were aimed at the military or government users, they were a piece of electronics with a kind of a relatively simple piece of software in them, but the software, the program, was stored in this thing called an EEPROM, which basically is a device where you can write the program and it's held electrostatically inside the chip. Now, the chip's life is only kind of guaranteed for kind of 9 years. And the reality is the radios were generally designed to have a service life of 7 years. So there was a buffer. But we're now keeping these radios alive, 20, 30 years after the manufacture date. So it's not surprising that some of these chips are starting to fail. Now, when I say fail, they're not actually breaking. It's just they lose the information that's stored in them. And in fact, if you can rewrite that information, they'll work again quite happily for another 9 years. So it's vital that you can take the program out of the chip while it's still working, put it onto a computer, and then when you need it, you can rewrite that information back into the chip to give you a new lease of life. Now, we came across this by accident. We found one of our radios suddenly started having faults on startup, and we looked at kind of what the problem was. We soon realised that it was the EEPROM. We were able to take the EEPROMs out and put them onto an EEPROM reader that was connected to a computer and was more sensitive than the electronics actually in the radio. So we were able to extract the program and then re-encode the very same chip with the same program but with a new static charge. So in fact we kind of overwrote what was there before. We realise that this is going to affect lots and lots of people because these radios are all going to be failing in the next few years. So it's our plan to have a library of all the EEPROMs we can get, and then we can offer a service to people where if they do lose the contents of their EEPROM, they'll be able to come to the museum, bring the chip with them, and we'll blow into it the version they need. Now, when we get some of the manufacturers of equipment had very many different variants, even of the software, even within the same apparently similar product range of radios, because depending on the customer, they put different facilities and features into the software. So what we would recommend is that people actually take the radio apart, take the EEPROMs out, and either read them themselves on a computer or bring them to us, and we'll read their program and save it for them. And so we really could be a backup insurance policy for people with these radios. As I say, they're the radios that were in the 1970s and 80s and even into the 90s. That era of radio is the most susceptible, and we believe that's going to be a good service that we can offer the radio community.
So certainly is. Now, what I'd say, just as a caveat of what you said, because I don't want people giving you a hard time, if you don't feel comfortable taking the EEPROMs out of your radio, don't do it. Get somebody who does know what they're doing, because we're not taking responsibility for this. Number two, by giving you that piece of information means that I'm sure lots of nice radios that would have come up in the next few years at rallies as not working and very, very cheap, I'm no longer going to be able to buy because people know that they can flash the EEPROMs again.
Yeah, that's very, very, very true. What is interesting, of course, some of the radios which were perhaps being sold with limited features, if you now put a different program that was originally devised for that model of radio, you can now re-enable the features that were effectively cut out.
So very, very interesting things there on that, and great piece of information we've imparted in just this short bit.
The ICQ podcast. Come for a moment. Stay for an hour.
Well, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed our feature there on the Radio Communication Museum that's located in Derby in the UK. It's a very visual interview as the interview continued on. It's about an hour-long YouTube video that's available. So pop along to youtube.com/ICQ podcast and you can check out that full video there. Lots to see, as I say. So we'll bring back some nostalgic memories, I'm sure, for a lot of people. And as I say, certainly contact the guys there if you wish to visit. Say when we're back up and running again, club visits are available, and also potentially Steve was talking about opening around Hamfest weekend as well, to let people come down and see him that weekend. So that's end of September. So reach out to the guys there and let them know you're interested. Right, feedback now from our previous episodes, and we start off here with feedback from Mike Lewis, Mike 0, X-Ray, Mike X-Ray. And he said, just been listening to ICQ podcast number 304 about training. You raised some very interesting points, which I agree with 100%, mainly keeping HF bands back as a goal for passing higher licenses, and the way old boys, in inverted commas, don't encourage newbies. I'm one of those newbies and was very much treated like a CB by my club until I got my intermediate and started training for my full. I think the RSGB should in some way incentivise clubs to recruit new enthusiasts into the hobby, maybe with subsidised fees, etc. 73s for Mike Lewis, Mike 0, X-Ray, Mike X-Ray. So interesting ideas there, Dad. And again, sometimes this culture of, the closed shop mentality, which can be some of the problems. We also spoke about as well within clubs versus hubs as well, didn't we? And how different people are maybe more geared towards different parts of the hobby, and certainly Mike's experiences echo that, don't they?
They certainly do, Colin. And with him saying he's been treated like a CBer, that's kind of, I can understand what he means. And I'm going to put my neck on the block because Martin Rothwell, as I mentioned earlier in the show, convinced me to go up onto CB a couple of weeks ago. And there's nothing wrong with CB per se. It's just they're a different group of people that are interested in radio. And, we have a common interest, guys. It's called radio. Now, everybody brings something to the table. And certainly at the Sutton and Tune Club, we have that mentality that everybody brings something to the table. New licensee, shortwave listeners, CBer, full licensee. Doesn't matter. You bring something to the table and your interest is in radio and we should help you. And I'm one of the few amateurs, and I'm sure there are a lot more that haven't put their head above the parapet, but I'm one of the few amateurs who's put my head above the parapet and said, there's nothing wrong with CB. Often the CB guys are quite nice people. So, in fairness, it's a shame, but that people treat the two hobbies as completely different. But what you say about other things, don't be disappointed. Carry on the hobby, promote the hobby, and as the older boys drop out the network, remember we all had to go through it sometime, And I just think they get forgetful, the old boys, Colin.
Sometimes so. I mean, I keep referring to an event I went to a few years ago, a Microsoft Ireland event, and I've been in the right place at the right time with the guy's book to actually give him credit for this, saying a guy called Kevin Kelly gave a speech to us all that day and very motivational type speech. And one of the things he came out with, which I've always tried to hold on to, is start the day thinking the fact you can learn something from somebody. And it could be the youngest person you meet or the oldest person you meet, but start the day with that mentality. And I think that sometimes is something that a lot of people forget is that somebody new to us can teach us something very, very interesting. We miss that if we close our minds. So, finally I had Kevin's book with me there to remind me of who his name was, so I can finally give him credit for pinching his idea and being regurgitated for many, many years. Right, next one, Elliot Mansfield, who's listened to the show, and I know someone you know from a previous life, Dad, to listen to the last episode of the podcast, and he's talking about online exams, and he said Microsoft exams are online, and you do have someone watching with a web camera watching over you, and they take photos of your desk, front, back, and sides, and your ID. Camera and mic is on, so you can't cheat. And believe me, he says he's thought about it. You can't even leave your desk at all. Whereas in normal test centres, you could even leave your desk for a bathroom break, etc. As for practicals, he says he found them of very little use. They should, in his opinion, be optional or bins. So Elliot's opinions there, obviously, of good to hear his say experiences of other sort of online test centres and how they can facilitate making sure the right person passes the exams, and certainly it's something that maybe our National Association should be looking to bake into their systems.
Yeah, well, you've got to realise, Colin, in the nicest possible way, I've known Elliot probably best part of 15, 16 years. I know as of back end of last year, or the year before he'd done his intermediate. He's probably a full licensee now. I'm pretty sure he is. So that's no problems at all. Elliot is a very, very clever guy. And I'm sorry, Elliot, if your head's swelling when you listen to this. But he's a very, very clever guy. Going back to the early 2000s, Elliot and I worked at a company, and Elliot was being sold out at £1,000 a day as a consultant. He's a very, very technical guy. He's also very, very clever with his hands. So if I said to Elliot, go do this, he would end up doing it and he would produce something phenomenal. But Elliot is, in my opinion, is an exception. And I think I disagreed with him when I wrote the email to him and said, a lot of people get a lot of satisfaction out of doing the practicals. And, not everybody has the strong will that Elliot will have to go and do that. I mean, I'm going to embarrass him a little bit and know that he's into custom cars as well. And he designed his own fuel injection system for it. So Elliot's a very technical guy. He's more than capable of doing a lot of these things on his own. But there aren't many that are. And the majority of us need a social group around us to actually drive us forward. So that's where I am, Elliot. I kind of understand why you get annoyed with it, but for the majority, I still think the practicals are a very good thing.
Exactly right. So last one there, we're going to congratulate our friend and colleague Bill Barnes, who after nearly 29 years of being known as November 3 Juliet India X-Ray, was assigned a new vanity call sign this last week. So Bill will now be known as Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo. So congratulations, Bill, on getting your call sign. And certainly another one for me to try and remember and potentially mess up regularly until it comes into the brain, Dad.
Well, I've screwed up on Bill's call sign many a time, and as he said on the last episode previous to this one, he'd only had the call sign 28 years and 11 months, so I had plenty of time to learn it, but yeah. Congratulations, Bill. Nice call sign, WC3B. Have a good one, Bill.
No problems at all. Right then, so just to wrap up now, so we're going to thank Ben Harrison, Alpha Juliet 6 November Hotel. Listen to one episode and set up a subscription donation straight away because of how much he enjoyed the show. So we really like to thank you, Ben, for doing that. You can show your value for the show and keep us advert free by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate. And whatever you see value in the show, send our way, and that keeps us advert free. And we really do appreciate all the donations at obviously this time. We'd like to thank Leslie, Golf 0, Charlie India Bravo, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, and Dan, KB6 November Uniform, for taking part in the News Roundtable. Mentioned the YouTube channel for checking out not only that full interview with the Radio Communications Museum, but also all our other previous interviews we've done at Dayton Hamfest, UK Hamfest, and even some of the old ones from Friedrich Schaven as well. Check those out. If you're needing to get a fix for a rally, you're more than welcome to check those things out from there. We mentioned as well the COVID-19 news stories. We'll publish them straight to the website, so do subscribe to the email newsletter on the website to be kept up to date with what's going on there. So we're keeping the show as light-hearted as we can for you guys, so you enjoy the hobby. But as I say, all the information on those things will be published straight to the website for you from there. Right, that's about our notices finished off there, I think, Dad. Anything else that you're up to over the next fortnight at all that you'd like to let us all know about?
Well, going to be busy at work because I'm still working. I would suggest that people will catch me on the air a bit more regularly than they used to do. I've been playing with Arduinos, as I said earlier. And generally, I'm pretty busy. I've got a couple of things I'm going to start repairing. I've sent off for some spare parts to repair some items that have been sitting in the junk room for a long time. So I'm very, very busy at the moment, probably busier than I normally am. And I've got the lovely Mrs. B at home with me now because she no longer works. So as we continue, this is a great time to be at home. Just one other thing I would say is, and Colin's pretty much said it, but if you're on the air and you find value in these podcasts, why not tell other people about them? If you find value in them, while everybody's sitting at home and bored and one thing or another, the podcasts are online. And if you find value in it, tell other people about it. The same with the YouTube channel. Yeah, you could help us by promoting. And I'm sure if you find enjoyment from it, others will as well that maybe not know about us. So I think that's fair, isn't it, Colin?
It very much is, very much is. And as I say, hopefully, as I say, with all the negativity in the news at the moment, they might appreciate an hour or so's time just enjoying people talk about the hobby and get something, obviously, from what we do. Well, you mentioned a cup of tea for Mrs. B, so I better let you go off and do that now. And hopefully there's no shortages of chocolate biscuits in London, and there'll be a chocolate biscuit to go alongside the cup of tea.
Yeah, certainly will, Colin, and I'm off to do that now. So that's a good one. Listen, I say 73s to you and all our listeners, and pass it back to you.
No problem still. 73s all, guys. We'll see you all in a fortnight's time. 73s.